She was humiliated by the man who was supposed to love her on a cruel night. He ridiculed her in front of everyone. Years later, she returns unrecognizable, demonstrating that the humiliation was the beginning of her greatest victory. It was a sunny morning at Angel's imposing mansion. But inside that house, the atmosphere was far from reflecting the calm that could be seen outside. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Catalina set the breakfast table, carefully choosing the plates and cutlery that would please her demanding husband. Angel, already dressed in an impeccable suit, he descended the stairs with a serious demeanor, as if carrying the weight of the entire corporate world on his shoulders. He stopped in front of the large mirror in the hallway, adjusting his tie while observing his own image. Perfect as always, he said to himself while making the final adjustments. When he reached the dining room, his eyes landed on Catalina. She was wearing a simple floral dress, the same one he knew he didn't like but that she loved for how comfortable it was. "Catalina, please tell me you're not going to wear that tonight at the company event." Angel shot out, not even trying to hide the critical tone. He grabbed his cup of coffee and sat down, looking her up and down. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Angel, I thought it would be something more informal. And this is one of my favorite dresses," she replied with a mix of insecurity and an attempt to appease him. "Favorite? Catalina, do you understand the importance of this event? It's the company's 25th anniversary. And all the important people in the city will be there. I want you to live up to my name. I can't be seen next to someone who looks like they came from a street fair," he said with a cold, condescending smile. Catalina felt the weight of those words. She had spent all morning trying to make everything perfect to please him. But it seemed like her efforts were never enough. "I just want you to be proud of me, Angel," she murmured, avoiding looking him in the eyes. "Pride? Catalina? Don't be naive. I only feel pride for myself. The only thing you have to do is make sure you don't embarrass me tonight." Angel got up, his coffee cup half empty, walked to the door, picked up his leather briefcase, and before leaving, turned to her. "In the afternoon, I'll send a stylist to make sure you're presentable. I don't want any surprises." When the door closed, Catalina was left alone in the kitchen, holding her breath as if that moment could alleviate the knot she felt in her chest. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. After all, that was what she always did, swallow what she felt and move on without questioning anything. At the office, Angel was more energetic than ever. His colleagues were already used to his authoritarian tone and his need to always be in control. He gave rapid orders, often ignoring the efforts of others. "I want the reports on my desk before 3 p.m. Without errors. You know that the company's success depends on me," he would say with a tone that mixed pressure and self-importance. In the afternoon, at home, the stylist arrived with a selection of expensive dresses and jewelry for Catalina. She tried on each garment, feeling like a puppet. When she chose an elegant blue dress, she looked in the mirror and tried to convince herself that this was the life she wanted. That night, as she was getting ready for the event, Angel entered the room and evaluated her with a critical gaze. "Now, that's what I'm talking about. You finally look like someone who matches me," he declared, not noticing the sadness in Catalina's face. "I just hope that tonight is important for you, Angel, and that we can both enjoy it," she said with a forced smile. "Catalina, I don't need you to enjoy it. I need you to be perfect by my side. Nothing more." He turned and left the room, unaware of how much those words pierced Catalina's soul. Angel's mask remained intact, at least for the world. But inside the house, the cracks were already beginning to show. Catalina, as always, drowned her sorrows in silence while Angel continued to feed his obsession with being the center of attention. Indifferent to the price others paid for it. The night had arrived, and the hall was illuminated impeccably with crystal chandeliers that cast golden reflections on the tables decorated with white flowers and sparkling glasses. All eyes turned to the guests arriving, discreetly assessing their attire and manners. Catalina felt every pair of eyes on her as she walked beside Angel, holding his arm with a nervous grip. The blue dress, chosen under pressure, now seemed to squeeze her more than it should, not because of the size but because of the weight of insecurity. "Please smile, Catalina," Angel muttered out of the corner of his mouth while waving to a group of executives. "Don't make me look like an unhappy husband." Catalina tried, but the smile didn't come out as she had hoped. She knew she was out of her element. The forced laughter, the conversations about luxury trips and multi-million-dollar investments made her feel like an intruder in that world. She observed the other women around her, impeccable with dresses that seemed to be taken from magazines, wearing jewelry that was worth more than anything she had ever worn. "Angel, I'm going to get a glass of wine," she said, trying to get away from the unease. "Don't be ridiculous," he replied without even looking at her. "You don't even know how to hold a glass correctly without looking like a country bumpkin." The words were harsh. Catalina took a deep breath and stayed by his side. Then the conversation that Angel had been so eagerly awaiting began. He was surrounded by colleagues and important investors, all hanging on every word that came out of his mouth. Angel, who is the beautiful lady accompanying you? One of the executives asked in a friendly tone. Catalina smiled timidly, ready to introduce herself, but before she could speak, Angel interrupted her with a dry laugh. Ah, she's Catalina, my wife. She's not very used to these events. I must admit that she's still adapting to this world. The group laughed, but Catalina didn't see the humor in it. Heat rose to her face, and she wished the ground would open up beneath her feet. At that moment, one of the women in the group, elegantly dressed in a long gold dress, looked Catalina up and down. Well, dear, we've all been through that. You just need the right dress and a little confidence. Catalina tried to respond, but Angel intervened again, now with a smile that carried a hidden venom. Or maybe something a little more basic. Something she can wear more often. After all, it would be a shame to spend money on an expensive dress only for her to feel like someone who doesn't belong here. He laughed at his own joke. The laughter resonated in Catalina's heart. Angel, you're embarrassing me, she whispered, her voice filled with pain. Embarrass you, Catalina? Please, he retorted louder than he should have. You should be thanking me for being here. And honestly, that dress looks like something someone would find in a second-hand store. The group fell silent, some exchanging uncomfortable glances, but Angel didn't notice. He was too busy holding up his mask of superiority. Catalina felt her eyes filling with tears but refused to cry in front of them. She let go of Angel's arm and took a step back. I need some air, she said with a trembling voice. Sure, go, Angel replied, not noticing the gravity of the moment. Just don't take too long. Remember you're here to support me. Catalina left the hall with quick steps, the sound of her heels echoing in the empty hallways. When she reached the outside, the cool night air enveloped her, bringing with it a sense of relief and freedom. Tears finally rolled down her face as she leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath. Inside the hall, Angel continued his conversation, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife wouldn't be returning. While he talked about his accomplishments and plans for the company, Catalina had already made a decision. She returned to the mansion before him, packed her things, and left a note on the living room table. When Angel arrived home, still euphoric about the event, he noticed that something was wrong. The silence was unusual, and Catalina wasn't waiting for him as usual. He found the note and read it with an expression of disbelief. I deserve more. The impact of the words was immediate, but Angel, in his arrogance, thought it was just a fleeting emotional outburst. He didn't know that at that moment, Catalina had decided to put a definitive end to the life she was living by his side. Her life was just beginning, but he didn't know it yet. The sun was rising on the horizon, casting golden hues over the small town where Catalina had started her new life. She stood in front of a simple window, a cup of coffee in her hands, and her gaze fixed on the sky. 7 years had passed since the night she left Angel, and with each sunrise since then, Catalina had chosen to reinvent herself. At first, it was painful. She left the mansion without looking back, carrying only a suitcase and the determination to never again allow anyone to belittle her. She found refuge in a modest boarding house, and the first few months were difficult. She worked in a small coffee shop, facing long hours and impatient customers, but she saved every penny to invest in herself. One night, after a grueling shift, Catalina sat in the small boarding house room with a brochure in her hand. It was a night course in business administration. She remembered the countless times Angel had made her feel incapable, as if she had no place in his corporate world. I'm going to prove that he was wrong, she said to herself softly. She enrolled in the course the next day and began a new stage in her life. The classes were challenging, but Catalina was hungry to learn. Catalina, I've never seen anyone so dedicated, one of her professors commented on one occasion. She smiled timidly, but inside, she felt stronger with each compliment. She graduated with honors 3 years later, ready to explore a world that had once seemed unattainable. It was on this path that Sebastián López entered her life. A renowned businessman, Sebastián was known as much for his intelligence in business as for his humility. They met at an entrepreneurship conference where Catalina was invited to speak about her experience in overcoming adversity. Dressed in an elegant black suit and with a confident posture, Catalina took the stage. Her voice, firm and full of emotion, captured the attention of everyone in the room. But it was Sebastián who was most impressed. You have an incredible story, he said, approaching her after the talk. I would like to talk more about how we could work together. Catalina, still surprised by the direct approach, replied with a smile. I would love to, Sebastián. I think we have a lot to talk about. What started as a professional collaboration soon turned into something deeper. Sebastian treated her with respect and admiration, something Catalina had never experienced before. He valued her opinions and encouraged her dreams. "Catalina, you are the strongest and most inspiring woman I have ever met," he told her one night while they were having dinner at a restaurant facing the sea. "I never thought anyone could see me like that," she replied with a sparkle in her eyes. "For so long, I lived in the shadow of someone who made me feel small. Inferior." Sebastian took her hand. "Never allow that again. You are extraordinary, and the world needs to know this woman that I have the privilege of loving." With Sebastian's support, Catalina founded her own consulting company, helping women rise in adverse situations. Her name became known, and her work was admired. Now she walked with her head held high, wearing clothes that reflected her personality, elegant but practical, with a touch of boldness. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in her office, Catalina received a message from Sebastian. "We have an invitation to an event from your ex-husband's company. I want you to decide if you want to attend." Catalina looked at the invitation, feeling a mix of emotions. She was no longer that submissive and insecure woman. Now she was Catalina Lopez, a transformed woman. With a smile, she replied, "Let's go. I think it's time to face my past." Finishing her message, she got up and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She no longer saw the woman she once was, disparaged, but someone who had found her strength, her worth, and above all, her happiness. The hall was full, sparkling as never before, with soft music in the background and a vibe of anxiety floating in the air. For Angel, this event was his last move. The company he had controlled so fervently was on the verge of collapse. And he knew that closing a contract with influential investors that night could be his only opportunity to save his career and with it his pride. Dressed impeccably in a dark suit, Angel disguised his nervousness as he walked through the hall with a fake smile painted on his face. He stopped at the bar, holding a glass of wine he had barely touched, observing the surroundings, calculating every move. Suddenly, the sound of the doors opening caught his attention. A woman entered, immediately drawing all eyes. Her steps were firm, and the red dress she wore seemed tailored just for her. Catalina. Angel's heart sank as if an invisible hand were strangling him. He blinked in disbelief. The woman in front of him was almost unrecognizable, except for the eyes. Those eyes that he used to ignore, now full of confidence and sparkle, seemed to challenge the world with an eloquent silence. Next to her was Sebastian Lopez, the renowned businessman whom Angel both admired and feared. "It can't be," Angel murmured to himself, almost spilling his glass. He tried to regain his composure, but he felt his hands sweat as Catalina and Sebastian crossed the hall. Greeting some people along the way, Sebastian was the first to notice Angel. He bowed slightly and whispered something in Catalina's ear. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was no anger or resentment in Catalina's face, only an impressive calm that completely disarmed Angel. Catalina did not look away. Instead, she offered a slight smile, one of those that said, "I've won." Angel approached, driven by a mixture of emotion, regret, curiosity, and perhaps a hint of hope. When he was just a few steps away from them, Sebastian smiled politely and stepped to the side, as if making room for the reunion. "Catalina," Angel began in a voice more insecure than he would have liked. "Angel," she replied with a neutral tone. "How long has it been?" Angel took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. He needed to appear confident as always, but something about Catalina's presence made him feel small. "You look wonderful," he said with more emotion than he intended. Catalina tilted her head slightly, as if analyzing the man in front of her. "Thank you. Life has been generous with me." Sebastian, who was observing from the side, intervened with a polite smile. "Angel, I don't think we've been formally introduced. I'm Sebastian Lopez, Catalina's husband." He extended his hand, and Angel, with no other option, shook it with a mechanical movement. "Husband?" Angel stammered as his face turned pale. "That's right," Catalina replied with a slight smile. "Sebastian has been my greatest partner. He showed me a world that I didn't know could exist." Angel felt as if the ground was opening up beneath his feet. He desperately tried to change the subject, looking for something to say so as not to look so defeated. "I've heard a lot about you, Sebastian. You're an inspiration in the business world. And Catalina is my greatest inspiration," Sebastian replied, without losing his elegant tone. "She's brilliant in what she does. We have incredible projects together." Angel looked at Catalina again, but this time, there was something different in his eyes, a deep regret. With overwhelming clarity, he saw what he had lost. "Catalina, I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry for everything." She observed him for a moment, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. Then, with the same calm, she replied, Angel, you don't need to apologize. Actually, I thank you. It was thanks to you that I discovered who I really am. Before he could respond, one of the event organizers approached and informed that Sebastian's presentation would begin in a few minutes. Catalina looked at Sebastian and smiled, gently touching his arm. Let's go, love, they're waiting for you. Sebastian nodded and looked at Angel for the last time. It was a pleasure meeting you. Angel, I hope tonight is productive for you. As the couple walked away, Angel remained still in the center of the hall, feeling the overwhelming weight of loneliness and regret. He realized that while trying to impress the world, he had lost the person he should have truly impressed. Catalina was no longer the submissive woman he knew. Now she was a force that he could never reach again. The event was in full swing when Catalina, with the same confident posture as before, decided to take a walk on the terrace. Illuminated by the lights of the city, the cool breeze caressed her face as she leaned on the railing. Watching the stars in the clear sky, Sebastian was busy with other entrepreneurs in the hall, but Catalina knew that he would soon join her. She had barely had time to enjoy the silence when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Angel. He hesitated for a moment before approaching, as if seeking the courage to face what he knew would be a crucial moment. Catalina, he began, his voice lower and more restrained than usual. I needed to talk to you alone. She turned slowly, crossing her arms, her gaze fixed on his. Angel, I'm not sure we have anything more to say to each other. But I'm listening. He took a deep breath, as if the words weighed on his throat. I was wrong about you. And it took me too long to realize it. When you left that note, it was as if a part of me had been torn away. Catalina remained silent, her eyes impassive, but Angel continued. I thought I had everything under control, that my life was perfect. But you were the piece that made everything worthwhile. And I was blind, I was arrogant, and now I see how much you've changed. You've become the woman I always knew you could be. She tilted her head with a slight, cold smile on her lips. Everything I always could have been. Angel, I was always capable of this. The difference is that now there is no one to belittle me, to humiliate me, to tell me what I can or cannot do. The words hit him like a dagger. But he didn't give up. Catalina, I just want a chance. A chance to fix what I destroyed. To show you that I can be different. Before Catalina could respond, Sebastian's footsteps echoed on the terrace. He appeared at the entrance, imposing but with the calm that characterized him. Everything okay here? He asked, looking directly at Catalina and ignoring Angel. She smiled softly at Sebastian. Yes, dear. Angel and I were just finishing a conversation. Sebastian approached and stood beside Catalina, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Angel, I find it admirable that you have recognized your mistakes. But with all due respect, the Catalina who is next to you now is not the same woman you met. And honestly, she doesn't need your forgiveness or your validation. And in case you forgot, she is now married to me. Angel felt the impact of the words, but tried to maintain his composure. I understand, Sebastian, but this is between her and me. Catalina raised a hand, interrupting him. The past can serve you to learn, to grow, but there is nothing here to discuss. Angel lowered his head. The pain in his eyes was now evident. You're right, I was an idiot, but I will never stop regretting it. Catalina took a deep breath, observing him for a long moment before responding. I hope you use that regret to become a better person. Angel, not for me but for yourself. As for me, I've already found my path. And I'm exactly where I always wanted to be. Sebastian gently squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of support that Angel could not ignore. He looked at the couple in front of him and saw something he had never experienced with Catalina: mutual respect and genuine love. I wish you the best, Angel said, his voice now resigned. He cast one last glance at Catalina before turning and walking away. His shoulders slumped more than when he had arrived. Catalina was silent for a moment, still looking in the direction that Angel had gone. Sebastian leaned towards her and whispered, Are you okay? She smiled, her eyes sparkling. Yes, for the first time in a long time. I am truly okay. The wind blew again, and Catalina turned to Sebastian, intertwining her fingers with his. As they returned to the hall, she knew she had definitively closed that chapter of her life. Angel had lost the opportunity to value her, but she had found something much more valuable herself. The rain was falling silently. Angel was sitting alone in his office, a room that had once seemed grand and full of life but was now cold and empty. The dim light of the lamp cast shadows on the walls as he stared at the desk in front of him. Old photos were scattered about, moments that he had neglected, faces that he had ignored while pursuing his obsession with status and power. In his hand, he held Catalina's note, the one that contained only 3 words, I deserve more. For years, he had avoided rereading it, trying to bury it under excuses and distractions. But now, each letter seemed to resonate within him, like a painful reminder of what he had lost. Angel sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. How did I get here? He murmured, looking at his reflection in the window glass, a tired man with more gray hairs and eyes that carried the weight of wrong decisions. I had everything, he said, his voice breaking, and I destroyed it with my own hands. He closed his eyes, remembering that night on the terrace. The way Catalina had looked at him, not with anger but with devastating calm. She did not need revenge. Her happiness was the most conclusive proof that he no longer had a place in her life. And that was what hurt the most. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in an elegant seaside restaurant, Catalina and Sebastian were sitting at a table near the window. The waves gently crashed against the rocks, creating a soothing sound as the couple shared a bottle of wine. Catalina laughed at something Sebastian had said, her face illuminated with a genuine joy that she hadn't felt in a long time. Are you happy? Sebastian asked with a warm smile. More than I ever imagined I could be, Catalina replied, taking his hand over the table. You have given me more than I expected, Sebastian, but above all, you taught me to value myself. Sebastian nodded, looking at her with admiration. You always had that strength, Catalina. I just had the privilege of seeing you blossom. She smiled and looked at the ring on her finger. A symbol not only of love but of a true partnership. And to think that for so long, I thought that love was just accepting what they gave me, the scraps that were left over. Now I know that love is respect. It's sharing, it's growing together, and above all, it's giving strength to each other. While they talked, Angel remained standing in front of his window, watching the rain that fell relentlessly. Sebastian's words that night resonated in his mind. She does not need your forgiveness or your validation. Each word pierced his pride like a dagger. He wondered how many times he had chosen his ego over a simple gesture of kindness. How many times he had ignored Catalina's pain while building a pedestal for himself. And now, realizing how much she had thrived without him, he felt the truth like an unbearable weight. She didn't need him. She had never needed him. Angel sat down again, taking a pen and a piece of paper. For the first time in years, he decided to write something sincere. It wasn't for Catalina. He knew that she didn't need his words. It was for himself. He wrote about his mistakes, about his arrogance, and about the lesson he had learned too late, that the value of a person lies not in what they possess but in how they treat those around them. As he finished writing, a small, melancholic smile appeared on his face. It was too late to fix the past. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was still time to change who he was. Back in the restaurant, Catalina and Sebastian toasted. Her smile was one of freedom, of a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes. Theirs was a love built on solid pillars, respect, admiration, and a true union. Catalina looked out the window at the stars that shone over the sea and felt a peace that could not be described with words. For Catalina, the past was just a reminder of who she had been, but the present was proof of who she had become. And for Angel, that rainy night marked the beginning of a long reflection, a solitary journey of repentance but also of possibility. In the end, life, with all its imperfections, always offers the opportunity to learn. It only takes one to want it.